Hello and welcome to the Seer 365 sessions. Every week, I'm very fortunate I get to have a conversation with somebody from the Microsoft channel. And the whole point of this is really to learn from others and to see if there's something you can take from this conversation that you can take back to your own business, either by working with the partners that I bring on or just to spark some ideas about things that you can do within your business. Today, I'm really excited to bring somebody on to talk around a topic that I know absolutely nothing about. Those of you that know me may not find that surprising. There's a topic I don't know much about, but this one in particular, I know nothing about. So we're all in the same boat probably on this one. But I think it's a really interesting topic that hopefully many of you will get a lot out of. So with that, I'd like to welcome John to the podcast. Hi, John.
Hi there, Rich. Thanks for having me today. Good to see you.
Not at all, mate. Really pleased that you could join us, and thanks again for finding some time to talk to us. So, as always, do you want to start with a little bit about yourself and a bit about Yavrio?
Yeah, for sure. But can I also just say, Rich, thanks so much for doing these, because I think that it's really helped me to see a lot more of what other people are doing in the industry, in the space, and get out of a siloed mentality and really get a broader picture for what's going on. So that's been great. Thanks for putting these on. My name, for most people who maybe don't know me, is indeed John Lewis. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse. So instant name recognition on the one hand, but on the other hand, sometimes somebody puts your emails to junk because you think it's marketing. I'm the CEO and founder at Yavrio, and we're an open banking provider for Dynamics 365, Business Central, and shortly to launch on F&O as well, F and SCM, depending on your proclivities there. Yavrio, just to introduce that briefly, we always thought this was already being done. Actually, we thought there was somebody who had a grand scheme in mind that Microsoft were going to deploy something. Waited and realized that for a lot of the partners and customers out there on Business Central and D365 in general, they didn't have access to their banking feeds for their ERP systems anymore, not since 2018. So we've assembled a winning team there. We had to stand up a great team with strong people in tech, in commercial, strategy, compliance. It was actually a much larger piece than we realized initially. So we had to bring on a large number of people to really make it work and to make it win, not just to be acceptable, but to be something that's great. And so now what we're doing is we are enabling businesses to get their live bank information directly into D365. That means that basically you can connect to your bank, you can get your transactions down via live feeds, and you can push your payments up. In a nutshell, that's what we do.
Very cool. And I sometimes talk to companies that have got a very specific thing that they do for a very niche industry. My favorite one being fish farming, but that's a separate topic completely.
We'll talk about that later, Rich, if that's okay.
Well, if you need a fish farm. But this one for me is really interesting because, let's face it, there is no organization that doesn't need to move money around somewhat, paying people, taking money from the bank, putting money back into your accounts, whatever it might be. So I think the opportunity for people to work with you in this instance is very cool and very wide. So let's start, and I'm going to assume that most people have got about as much knowledge about open banking as I do. I did watch a 30-second video on open banking, but so that's my level of knowledge. So let's just start from zero. What is open banking, and why did this set of standards, I guess you could call it, get produced, and what were the problems it was fixing?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that what most people will be familiar with is the problem that open banking causes. So to start off with, what will have happened is that in about 2018, most D365 partners will have realized they no longer were able to easily integrate to banks anymore. as used to be the case through either direct integration or a number of providers. And so when I first came across open banking, I was like, this is just an inconvenient thing that's been inconvenient piece of legislation. But actually, what open banking was in about 2015 through the EU then, but it's also been incorporated into UK law. What they identified was, as things are becoming more technically sophisticated, there's going to be a high risk of cybersecurity, fraud, all of these kind of negative aspects, as well as needing to streamline the economy by providing easier access to financial data, banking data, for customers via third-party providers, like us in this respect. So, in order to make sure that they that banks were coming online with this, that banks were getting on board to protect their customer base and to facilitate the free movement of finance around the economy, they put into place a piece of regulation called Payment Service Directive 2, which I don't want to get too technical here, but basically what it did was it said banks have to provide structured access to their data, and it has to be done in a way that more or less looks like this. It has to meet minimum security protocols. It has to be implemented in a safe and secure way. It has to be easy to access for organizations and for customers. So it was really, although it was inconvenient in the short term for ERP users in terms of turning off the taps for bank access, it's definitely strategically the right piece in the long term there.
Very cool. So that sort of came out, and obviously, people made the best of it where possible. Yeah. So what are like the benefits? What are the benefits people are seeing around that one?
Yeah, so really cool when the benefits get switched on. So as soon as you come out of the old understanding of how they used to connect was really called screen scraping access to banks, where you maybe had cached credentials and they would get passed along and so on in many cases, unless you'd built some kind of direct connector. So when you have open banking APIs mediating the access, what it means is that your data is really available to you as live in your systems. So you might have some experience with providers like Yolt, Mint, and others that do account aggregation. You'll start to see some more banks doing this as well, where they say, hey, you can view all of your bank accounts in one location. So in the same way, we can do live API calls to banks to get your live bank feeds visible to you. So without you having to go and find the data and the information. When your bank data is live in your system, I think, for those of us who like data, I don't want to get too geeky on the data front, but obviously coming from a bit of a data background, it's always very interesting to me that as soon as you've got your data in your environment, the list of things that you can do with that is almost endless. There's so much that you can do in terms of automation of your banking, which involves reduced spend as well, because you're not having to just hire additional people every time you want to increase your functionality. And it's not really bells and whistles stuff either. This is really core pieces that a lot of CFOs and CEOs are starting to prioritize now. And one of the best things, I guess, is that it helps us move away from CSV files. So I often like to tell people that CSV files were invented in around 1972 or 1978, depending on what source you look at. But we're talking like it's over half a century old, this mechanism for putting data together, and we're still using it to send data around the internet. And some of our most critical sensitive data, our banking and finance data, in terms of transactions down and payments up. And it's actually relatively simple for people to commit fraud in some of these processes when we don't have online interactions, but we're handballing files around the internet. Small scripts can be sitting in folders, finding a couple of commas and changing a 6-digit number to one that favors my account, an 8-digit number to one that favors my account, and so on. So what open banking does is it bypasses all of that file-based interaction. And it means everything's online, everything is streamlined through APIs, and we just have no fingerprints or fewer fingerprints on the on the information as it gets passed across. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm glad you're keeping it at a level that I can keep up with. So I very much appreciate that.
I could. Yeah, there's so much more.
Yeah.
That's kind of coming down the pipeline because open banking is really new. I mean, like I say, it's only really been formalized in terms of implementation by the banks in about 2018, which means that now all of these organizations and companies are beginning to think more and more about, well, hold on a second, if this is all live, what can we do next? So in terms of things coming down the pipeline, you're going to hear stuff about virtual accounts. So I'd love to, talk at length at another time maybe about this, but the concept of giving each of your customers a unique bank account to pay into, so you know exactly where money has come from, which decreases reconciliation headaches. Variable recurring payments, auto balancing your bank accounts if one goes under, auto applications, easier access to credit through buy now, pay later, pieces like this. All of this is really being imagined right now. It's a really exciting time to be a part of those conversations.
So are there certain banks that you think are more kind of, which of the banks that are doing this the best, would you say, at the moment?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. So not all banks are created equal in this respect. So you in the banking sector at the moment, there are two ways of describing banks. You often talk about trad banks or traditional banks versus neobanks. It's not my words. These are just monikers that get attached in the industry. And a lot of the trad banks have come from what you might call a highly acquisitive background. If you look at the number of bank mergers that have happened over the last 40 years, it's phenomenal. And so often what you have in these traditional banks is they've got huge numbers of systems that have been stuck together with, I don't know, Excel and duct tape in the background in many cases, which you might not think to look at a bank that presents itself well to you. But sometimes you'll hear about, this bank system went down and that one went down. A couple of banking providers went down when there was the Azure outage a couple of weeks ago, or whenever that was. And so the neobanks often have a bit of an advantage because they're able to design some of their infrastructure based around today's requirements without having to bring across all of the legacy systems that are there. And actually, I'm sure like a lot of people, in fact, most people listening in have got some level of experience in going into older organizations where you've got huge numbers of legacy systems that need formalizing, strategizing, and so on. And that's really what I think a lot of the trad banks are facing. Some of them are facing it really well, but you often come across a few odd features. So, for example, some older banks don't allow you to make open banking payments more than about 25 at a time. So if you're trying to pay, 100 suppliers today, that means you've got to authorize 4 times. Whereas other banks, even some trad banks and some neobanks, will allow you to pay over 1,000 at a time because somebody set up their parameters just slightly differently, thinking with today's world in mind rather than maybe 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's funny you say that though, because I was at and this weekend I'm going down to watch Wales beat England in Cardiff, and I remember being at a rugby game a few years ago now, and there was I think he was the CIO, but it's certainly a senior exec from the IT arm of a very well known British bank, very big, a trad bank in your terms. And he mentioned they had 100,000 people in their IT team around the world. And you're like,
are you serious?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Like, it makes sense.
That's big. Like that's big. So
it's big and it's a risk. It makes sense if you think about how critical the data is, how many legacy systems have come through, how many customers they're supporting, and so on. And it can lead to a lot of fragmentation in what's going on in the back there. But as I say, some of the trad banks are actually facing it up quite well and optimizing what they're doing, and others are a bit slower to adopt.
So from a partner perspective, obviously my suggestion would be to work with Yavrio, but when a partner's talking to their prospects, their customers, what's the kind of how would you exploit this new this new opportunity they've got.
For sure. So I think one of the first things is to get your banking data live. Now, not everybody has a high enough frequency that they care, but the majority of organizations really do. Is sometimes you'll find people who just have a dormant company somewhere. They don't, they'll update their banks once a year or something like this, to do interest movements. But once you have your data live, then your organization gets live access, live visibility. Say, for example, in a company where it takes you quite a long time to get your transactions in, to reconcile and so on. What it means is that making operational decisions with cash assets in mind is harder, because instead of being able to say, what's our position right now, you often have to say, what's our position when we do end of month reporting? And the management account pack comes out once they've reconciled and so on. So giving people immediate access to this data improves in the moment operational decision making, access to the information there. But like I say as well, once you have that data there, a lot of the time sitting with key users in finance departments and saying, now you have this, what do you want to do with it? Giving them the ability to imagine, now that they have the data in hand, as well as more powerful reporting tool sets that we see like Power BI and so on. Means that they can make better decisions and secure the futures of their company in a better way. That's what we're seeing.
Very cool. Yeah, and I'm starting to think of different things over the years. I would like just a board pack, right? With because a lot of companies now are using things like Power BI to create real-time board packs. So actually having those balances and all that information available as part of that would be, I'm sure, very, very valuable to people.
And what we often say to the people we're working with as well is we really want to hear from them what they're doing. So, very often, almost every week, we'll have customers speaking to us and saying, hey, actually, we'd be really interested in this as a feature. We'd be really interested in that. And it's coming out of a place where they've started to be able to imagine what can happen. Now they've got access to their data. If you've moved people off creaking old systems where it's been painful for many years, sometimes you'll speak to people who've been using the same. I don't want to do down any other providers, but they'll be using the same old software for 20 years plus. And then when they move to a Dynamics 365 system, they start to say, oh, wow, our AP can look like this and our finance can look like that. And we can automate this and we can streamline that. And the same thing is going to happen with their banking data as well. The level of imagination that follows on in the sort of, even 1 to 6 months after implementing is really something to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're coming towards the end of our time together, or on this anyway, not on our time together. We can talk as long as you want. Are there sort of any tips you'd want to give people, sort of what you're seeing coming down the pipe that you think would be worth people bearing in mind? Obviously, tip number 1, get in touch with Yavrio. Get that, but
that's right.
Outside of that one.
That's right. Yeah. Obviously, tip number 1, get in touch with the Yavrio and make your customers' lives better, make your lives better.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, I don't know, there's so much going on in open data. Can I give people like a couple of things they might want to look at in open data?
Yeah.
I mean, there's huge amounts of opportunity. So open data, by the way, is the more general approach, not just with banking, but with other areas. There's even things like open culture, open weather, open environment. There's these data sets that are being constructed and populated that people can build access to, build up the data sets. And if you want to start a side business today on top of what you're already doing, given that a lot of people already be working with data in a structured way, you could go to the open weather data sets and you can resell those to people like outdoors companies whose sales might correlate with the weather. If they're selling barbecues or camping equipment, things like that, then that enables them to predict where should I be getting my inventory in, where should I be prioritizing for the week that's coming up. Open environment data details things like pollutants and beach water quality and so on. you can pull together a data set like that, and people are interested in buying these data sets from you. You can hook it up into any kind of holiday app. So if people are booking their holidays, it might be a nice thing to say, yeah, and this beach is actually one of the cleanest ones in Europe. So you might want to book now and buy now. We actually do something similar with banking data. So we've had people come to us and say, could you advise us on which banks we should go with? So we collate some of the data that comes through in the industry and provide the data sets for free in this case, because it's just part of what we do. To say, here are some things that would help you to make better decisions. So yeah, I think a lot of the partners could be picking up on what the open data initiatives are, and just being imaginative with some of them. That'd be part of it, I guess.
Yeah, my brain's going at 1,000 miles an hour now. Like different partners that I know have got focus. So
yeah,
and I read, was it Martin? The guy that wrote The Big Short. Anyway, I think it's Martin Lewis. It's because you're called John Lewis. It's making me think.
And I know The Big Short, but the movie, not the book.
The author, but he was talking about
Martin Burrell. No.
Anyways, man.
But
he wrote a book about various government departments in the US, and the weather department was one of those. And so connecting weather to like companies that do logistics, or the example they had in the book was Walmart used the weather data so that if a hurricane was about to hit a city, they knew that based on historical trends, certain things would be lots of a SKU would be sold.
Right.
So, as an example, flashlights make sense, blankets stuff makes sense. Pop-Tarts was one that goes through the roof, apparently.
I get that.
So it's things like that you could start to offer. So that's good book, that, by the way. I've clearly forgotten the author and the name of the book, but you'll be able to work it out. Anyway, on that, John, thank you very much for your time today. If anybody watching this would like to get in touch with John, please do so. I've got his LinkedIn details down below, or go onto the Yavrio website and get in touch with them. Like I said, I think I can't think of a organization that doesn't have a bank account, and therefore having this type of solution in your kit bag to offer your customers, I think is something everybody should at least explore. So with that, I just want to thank you again, John, for your time, and I want to wish everybody watching and listening to this a happy rest of your week, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks so much for having me on, Rich. Take care.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.